Ruth's fingers trembled as she clutched the black duffel bag, her pregnant belly pressing against the cold concrete wall behind the First National Bank building. It was 3 in the morning, and the streetlights barely reached the narrow alley where she'd been sleeping for the past 4 nights. The bag had been sitting in the gutter when she woke up an hour ago, half submerged in dirty rainwater, looking like trash someone had thrown away. But when she unzipped it, her heart nearly stopped. Stacks of $100 bills, wrapped in plastic, filled every inch of the bag. She didn't need to count it to know this was more money than she'd ever seen in her entire 26 years of life. Her hands shook so violently that she almost dropped it. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. Just 6 days ago, she'd been sleeping in Egyptian cotton sheets in a mansion in Buckhead, and now she was a homeless pregnant woman holding what had to be stolen money. If you're watching this story, hit that subscribe button right now, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The night they threw her out played in her mind like a horror movie on repeat. Ruth had been married to Marcus Wellington for 2 years, and for 2 years, his family had treated her like she was dirt on their expensive shoes. Marcus came from old money, the kind of black wealth that had been building for generations through real estate, investments, and businesses that his great-grandfather started back in the 1950s. His mother, Victoria Wellington, made it clear from day one that Ruth, a girl from the South Side who worked as a nurse at Grady Memorial Hospital, wasn't good enough for her son. But Marcus had loved her, or at least she thought he did. He'd pursued her relentlessly after she treated him in the emergency room following a car accident. He'd sent flowers to her apartment every day for a month. He'd taken her to the best restaurants in Atlanta, introduced her to his world, and promised her that his family would come around eventually. 6 months later, they were married in a small ceremony that Victoria refused to attend. His father, Richard Wellington, came but left immediately after the vows. His sister, Jasmine, didn't even bother to respond to the invitation. Ruth told herself it didn't matter because she had Marcus, and that was enough. But 3 months ago, everything changed. Marcus started coming home late, sometimes not at all. He stopped touching her, stopped talking to her, stopped looking at her like she was a woman he'd moved heaven and earth to marry. Ruth was 12 weeks pregnant when she noticed the distance growing between them. She tried everything to reach him. She cooked his favorite meals, wore the laundry he used to love, asked him what was wrong 1,000 different ways. He'd just shake his head and say he was dealing with business problems, that she wouldn't understand, that he needed space. Then one Tuesday morning, she woke up and he was gone. No note, no text message, no explanation. His clothes were still in the closet. His car was still in the garage, but Marcus Wellington had vanished like smoke. Ruth called his phone 50 times that first day. Nothing. She called his office, and his assistant said he hadn't come in. She called his father, and Richard hung up on her. She called Victoria, and the older woman's voice was cold as ice when she said, "Perhaps he finally came to his senses about the mistake he made marrying you." That's when Ruth knew something was terribly wrong. For 3 days, Ruth lived in that mansion alone, jumping every time she heard a sound, hoping it was Marcus coming home. She barely slept, barely ate, just paced the floors and tried to figure out what had happened to her husband. On the 4th day, they came for her. Victoria, Richard, and Jasmine showed up with 2 security guards and a lawyer. They didn't knock. They used a key and walked right in like they owned the place, which technically they did. The house was in the Wellington Family Trust, not in Marcus's name. Ruth had been in the bedroom when she heard voices downstairs. She'd run down in her nightgown, her heart racing, hoping against hope that Marcus was with them. But he wasn't. Victoria stood in the foyer wearing a black Chanel suit and the coolest smile Ruth had ever seen. "Pack your things," Victoria said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You have 30 minutes. Ruth just stared at her, not understanding. Richard wouldn't even look at her. Jasmine was on her phone, bored, like this was just another Tuesday errand. "What are you talking about?" Ruth said, her voice shaking. "Where's Marcus? What's happening?" Victoria took a step closer, and Ruth could smell her expensive perfume, the kind that cost more than Ruth used to make in a month. "Marcus is gone, and is not coming back. This marriage is over. You're not a Wellington, and you never will be. Ruth felt the room spin. She grabbed the banister to steady herself, her other hand instinctively moving to her stomach, protecting the baby that Victoria didn't even know existed yet. I'm his wife, Ruth said, trying to sound stronger than she felt. You can't just kick me out. This is my home. That's when Richard finally spoke, his voice low and disgusted. This was never your home. You were a mistake, a phase, and now it's over. The lawyer has papers. You'll sign them, take the settlement we're offering, and disappear from our lives. The lawyer stepped forward, holding a folder. Mrs. Wellington, we're prepared to offer you $50,000 in exchange for a quick, quiet divorce and a non-disclosure agreement. You'll sign away any claim to the Wellington name, properties, or assets. $50,000. Ruth almost laughed. She was pregnant with their grandchild, and they were offering her $50,000 like she was a problem they could pay to go away. I'm not signing anything, Ruth said, her voice getting louder. Not until I talk to Marcus. Not until I know what's going on. Victoria's smile disappeared. She nodded to the security guards, and they moved toward Ruth. Then you'll leave with nothing, Victoria said. And if you try to fight us, we'll bury you in legal fees until you're begging us to let you sign. We have lawyers that cost more per hour than you make in a week. You think you can win against us. The guards grabbed Ruth's arms, and she tried to pull away, but they were too strong. Let me pack, she screamed. At least let me get my things. But they dragged her toward the door, her bare feet sliding on the marble floor. Jasmine finally looked up from her phone long enough to say, she doesn't deserve anything. She trapped Marcus, and now she's getting what gold diggers deserve. Ruth was crying now, begging, fighting, but it didn't matter. They threw her out into the driveway in her nightgown at 11 o'clock at night. The gates closed behind her with a final, terrible click, and Ruth stood there in the darkness, homeless, penniless, and completely alone. If you think that's devastating, wait until you hear what Ruth does with the $5 million she just found, because revenge is about to be so cold, and the Wellingtons are about to learn that karma doesn't forget. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell for Chapter 2. Ruth sat on the cold pavement, the bag between her knees, trying to breathe through the panic that was crushing her chest. The money was real. She'd checked 3 times, running her fingers over the bills, holding them up to the dim light from the street. $5 million. Maybe more. She couldn't think straight enough to count it all. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything but a stale sandwich from a gas station dumpster yesterday. The baby. She had to think about the baby. At 16 weeks pregnant, she was starting to show, and the morning sickness had been replaced by a constant, gnawing hunger that she couldn't satisfy. 4 days of sleeping behind buildings, begging for change, washing up in public restrooms had already taken a toll. Her nightgown was filthy and torn. Her hair, which she used to keep in neat braids, was matted and tangled. She looked like exactly what she was, a homeless pregnant woman that people crossed the street to avoid. But now she had $5 million in the bag, and she had no idea what to do with it. Keep it? Turn it in? The logical part of her brain, the part that had gotten her through nursing school and 12-hour shift for the hospital, screamed at her to take it to the police. This wasn't her money. Someone was looking for it. Someone dangerous. But the other part of her, the part that had been humiliated and thrown out like garbage by the Wellingtons, whispered something different. They left you with nothing. They took everything. Why shouldn't you take something for yourself? The sun was starting to rise, painting the Atlanta skyline in shades of orange and pink. Ruth knew she had to move. She couldn't stay here much longer. The bank employees would arrive in a few hours, and she couldn't risk anyone seeing her with a bag. She stood up slowly, her body aching from sleeping on concrete, and slung the duffel bag over her shoulder. It was heavy, heavier than she expected, and the weight of it felt like both a burden and a lifeline. She started walking, keeping her head down, moving through the empty streets like a ghost. Her mind raced with possibilities. She could rent an apartment, buy food, get prenatal care for the baby, maybe even hire a lawyer to find out what really happened to Marcus. But every scenario ended the same way, with police asking questions she couldn't answer, with investigators tracing the money, with her ending up in jail while her baby was born behind bars. She'd seen enough crime shows to know that spending stolen money left a trail. Banks reported large cash deposits. People noticed when homeless women suddenly had money. The system was designed to catch people like her, people who took what didn't belong to them, even when life had already taken everything from them first. Ruth found herself walking toward Memorial Drive, toward the neighborhood where she'd grown up, where her grandmother's house still stood even though Grandma Jean had died 3 years ago. The house had been sold to pay off medical bills, but Ruth knew every corner of that neighborhood, every shortcut, every safe place to hide. She ducked into a 24-hour laundromat, the kind with security cameras that never worked and a bathroom that locked from the inside. Ruth paid $2 for a wash cycle she didn't need and locked herself in the bathroom. She set the bag down and looked at herself in the cracked mirror above the sink. She barely recognized a woman staring back at her. Her brown skin was ashy and dull. Her eyes, which Marcus used to say were beautiful, looked hollow and exhausted. She was 26 years old, pregnant, abandoned, and now in possession of $5 million that could either save her life or destroy it completely. Ruth turned on the faucet and started washing her face, scrubbing away 4 days of dirt and tears. She needed to think clearly. She needed a plan. The money was too much to carry around, too dangerous to spend all at once, too risky to deposit in a bank. She thought about her old co-worker, Shanice, who'd always talk about keeping cash hidden at home because she didn't trust banks. Shanice used to joke about having a rainy day fund in her mattress. Ruth had laughed at her then, but now it didn't seem so crazy. If she could find a place to stay, somewhere cheap and quiet where nobody asked questions, she could hide the money and figure out her next move. But first, she needed to survive the next 24 hours without getting caught, robbed, or killed. When Ruth left the laundromat, the morning rush was starting. People hurried past her to catch buses and trains, everyone too focused on their own lives to notice a pregnant woman in a dirty nightgown carrying a black duffel bag. She walked for another hour until she found herself in Mechanicsville, standing in front of a rundown motel called the Sunset Inn. The sign was missing half its letters, and the parking lot was full of cars that looked like they'd been abandoned years ago. It was exactly the kind of place where nobody asked questions, where cash was king, and where the manager probably had a record longer than the guest list. Ruth pushed open the door to the office, and a bell chimed above her head. The man behind the counter looked up from his phone, his eyes moving from her face to her belly to the bag on her shoulder. He was older, maybe 60, with gray hair and a scar running down his left cheek. "Help you?" he said, not really a question. Ruth's throat was so dry she could barely speak. "I need a room, just for a few days." The man studied her for a long moment, and Ruth was certain he could see right through her, could see the stolen money, could see every bad decision she was about to make. $80 a night. Cash only. No refunds. Ruth reached into the bag, her hands shaking, and pulled out a $100 bill. She laid it on the counter, praying he wouldn't ask where a homeless pregnant woman got that kind of money. The manager took the bill, held it up to the light, then slid a key across the counter. "Room 12. Checkout's at noon. You want more nights. You pay in advance." Ruth grabbed the key and walked out before he could change his mind. Room 12 was at the far end of the motel, next to a dumpster and a broken ice machine. The room smelled like cigarettes and mildew. The carpet was stained with things Ruth didn't want to think about, and the bed looked like it hadn't been cleaned in months. But it had a lock on the door, and right now, that was all that mattered. Ruth dropped the bag on the bed and collapsed next to it, her body finally giving in to the exhaustion. She was safe, at least for tonight. She had shelter, and she had $5 million. But as she lay there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the motel, shouting from the room next door, a car alarm going off in the parking lot, footsteps in the hallway, Ruth realized something that made her blood run cold. Someone was missing $5 million, and they were going to come looking for it. And when they did, they'd find a desperate pregnant woman who had nothing left to lose. If you think Ruth's problems are over, think again, because in the next chapter, the real danger begins, and the Wellingtons are about to discover that the wife they threw away is about to become their biggest nightmare. Don't miss Chapter 3. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what you would do with $5 million. The pounding on the door came at 2 in the morning, 3 days after Ruth had checked into the Sunset Inn. She jolted awake, her heart hammering in her chest, the baby doing somersaults in her belly like it could sense her fear. "Open up! Police!" The voice was loud, aggressive, and accompanied by more pounding that shook the thin walls of the motel room. Ruth scrambled off the bed, her mind racing through 1,000 terrible possibilities. They found the money. Someone saw her. The motel manager called them. She was going to jail. Her baby would be born in prison. She grabbed the duffel bag from where she'd hidden it under the bed and looked around frantically for anywhere to hide it. The bathroom window was too small. The closet had no back panel. The pounding got louder, and she heard a key turning in the lock. They were coming in whether she opened the door or not. Ruth shoved the bag back under bed and ran to the door, pulling it open just as 2 men in suits pushed their way inside. But they weren't police. They didn't have badges, didn't have uniforms, and the way they looked at her made Ruth's blood turn to ice. These were the men who owned the $5 million, and they'd come to take it back. If you're not already subscribed, do it now because what happens next will blow your mind. The first man was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark skin and cold eyes that swept the room like a predator searching for prey. The second man was shorter but more frightening, with a scar that ran from his ear to his chin and a gun visible in a holster under his jacket. They weren't here to talk. They were here to hurt her if she didn't give them what they wanted. "Where is it?" the tall one said, his voice quiet but filled with enough menace to make Ruth's knees weak. She pressed her back against the wall, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly. "Where's what? I don't know what you're talking about." The shorter man laughed, a sound without any humor in it. He walked past her and started tearing the room apart. He ripped the sheets off the bed, threw the pillows across the room, yanked open the bathroom door, and swept everything off the counter. Ruth watched in horror as he moved with practiced efficiency, someone who'd done this before, someone who knew exactly how to find hidden things. The tall man moved closer to Ruth, so close she could smell cigarettes and cologne. "We know you have it. We've been tracking that bag for a week. It was supposed to be picked up behind the bank, but some homeless junkie grabbed it instead. That homeless junkie was you." Ruth's mind was spinning. They'd been watching. They knew she took the bag. But how did they find her? "I don't have any bag," Ruth said, her voice shaking. "I'm just trying to survive. I'm pregnant. Please, just leave me alone." The tall man grabbed her by the throat, not hard enough to choke her, but hard enough to make his point. "Don't lie to me. We traced you from the bank to the laundromat to here. We know you paid cash for this room. We know you've been hiding. Now tell me where the money is, or I'll make you wish you'd never been born." Ruth couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The baby was kicking frantically now, and she was terrified they were going to hurt her, hurt the baby, kill her and leave her body in this disgusting motel room where nobody would care. The shorter man found the bag under bed and let out a triumphant shout. "Got it!" He dragged it out and unzipped it, and Ruth watched a miracle, her salvation, her future disappear right in front of her eyes. The tall man released her throat and smiled. "Good girl. See, that wasn't so hard." But then the shorter man's face changed. He dumped the bag upside down, and only half the money fell out. Maybe $2 million at most. His eyes snapped to Ruth, filled with rage. "Where's the rest of it? There was $5 million in this bag. Where's the other $3 million? Ruth's mind went blank with terror because she had no idea what he was talking about. She hadn't touched the money except to pay for the motel room. She hadn't spent anything. She hadn't moved anything. But they didn't believe her. The shorter man crossed the room in 2 steps and backhanded her so hard she fell to the floor, her head cracking against the corner of the nightstand. Blood ran down her face, warm and sticky, and the room spun around her. "Where is it?" he screamed, kicking her in the side. Ruth curled into a ball, trying to protect her stomach, trying to protect the baby. I don't know. I didn't take anything. It was like that when I found it. The tall man pulled his partner back. Enough. She's telling the truth. Look at her. She's been living in this dump for 3 days. If she had $3 million, she'd be long gone. The shorter man was breathing hard, his fists still clenched. So someone else took it. Someone knew about the drop. Someone's playing us. The tall man looked down at Ruth, and there was something almost like pity in his eyes. You picked the wrong bag to steal. Girl, this money belongs to some very dangerous people. People who don't care that you're pregnant or that you're desperate. They're going to come looking for the rest of it, and they're going to assume you have it. Ruth tried to sit up, pain shooting through her ribs. Please, she whispered. I'll give you what's here. Just take it and leave me alone. The tall man shook his head slowly. It doesn't work like that. You're a witness now. You know about the money, about us, about the drop. We can't just let you walk away. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in low tones that Ruth couldn't hear over the ringing in her ears. When he hung up, he looked at his partner. Boss says bring her in. He wants to talk to her himself. They grabbed Ruth by her arms and hauled her to her feet. She tried to fight, tried to scream, but the shorter man clamped a hand over her mouth. Make a sound and I'll shoot you right here, he hissed. They dragged her out of the room, past the motel office where the manager deliberately looked the other way, and shoved her into the back of a black SUV with tinted windows. Ruth's last thought before they blindfolded her was that she was going to die tonight, and her baby would die with her, all because she'd been desperate enough to pick up a bag that didn't belong to her. And somewhere in Atlanta, the Wellington family was sleeping peacefully in their mansion, completely unaware that the woman they destroyed was about to disappear forever. But what Ruth didn't know was that Marcus Wellington was still alive, and he was about to walk back into her life in the most shocking way possible. Don't you dare miss Chapter 4. Comment below if you think Marcus is a villain or a victim, and smash that subscribe button because this story is about to get even crazier. They took the blindfold off in a warehouse that smelled like rust and old oil, somewhere near the railroad tracks where the sound of trains would cover any screams. Ruth's head was still bleeding from where she'd hit the nightstand, and her ribs ached where the shorter man had kicked her. She was sitting in a metal chair in the middle of an empty space, surrounded by shadows and the kind of silence that made her skin crawl. The tall man and his partner stood by the door, waiting. Then she heard footsteps, expensive shoes on concrete, and a man walked out of the darkness. Ruth's heart stopped. It was Marcus, her husband, the man who disappeared 3 months ago without a word, the man whose family had thrown her out like trash. He was alive, standing right in front of her, wearing a suit that probably cost more than she used to make in 6 months. And he was looking at her like she was a stranger, like she was a problem he needed to solve. Ruth couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't process what she was seeing. Marcus was involved with the money. Marcus was the reason she'd been kidnapped. Marcus was working with these dangerous men. Hello, Ruth, he said, his voice calm and cold. If you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, you better do it now because this revelation is just the beginning. Ruth found her voice, and it came out as a broken whisper. Marcus, what is this? What's happening? He walked closer, his hands in his pockets, looking down at her like she was something pathetic. I was hoping it wouldn't come to this. I was hoping you'd just disappear after my family kicked you out. Move back to wherever you came from. Get an abortion. Forget you ever knew me. The words hit Ruth harder than the punch had. Get an abortion. He knew about the baby. He'd always known. You left me, Ruth said, tears streaming down her face mixing with the blood. You vanished. Your family said you were gone. They threw me out with nothing. I've been homeless, Marcus, sleeping behind buildings, digging through trash for food. And you knew? You knew and you let it happen. Marcus sighed like she was inconveniencing him. It was business, Ruth. You were never supposed to be permanent. You were a distraction, a way to piss off my mother for a while. But then you got pregnant, and things got complicated. He gestured to the bag of money that the tall man was holding. This money was supposed to fund an investment deal. $5 million in unmarked bills, payment for a business transaction that needed to stay off the books. It was hidden behind the bank, waiting for pickup. And somehow, my homeless wife stumbled onto it. Ruth felt like she was drowning, like the world had tilted sideways and she couldn't find solid ground. You set me up. You made your family think you disappeared so they'd throw me out. You wanted me on the streets. Marcus shrugged. I needed you gone without the mess of a divorce. My mother handled it perfectly. And honestly, I figured you'd go back to your grandmother's neighborhood, maybe move in with friends. I didn't think you'd end up sleeping behind banks. He paused, studying her face. But you did, and you found my money. And now there's a problem because only half of it is here. The shorter man with the scar stepped forward. She says she didn't take the rest, but someone did. Someone knew about the drop. Marcus's jaw tightened. That means we have a leak. Someone on the inside talked. He looked back at Ruth. Or you're lying, and you hid the money somewhere before my men found you. Ruth shook her head frantically. I didn't take anything else. I swear, the bag was in the gutter, half in the water. Maybe some of the money washed away. Maybe it was never all there. I don't know. But even as she said it, she knew it sounded ridiculous. $3 million didn't just wash away. Marcus pulled out his phone and made a call. Get Davis and Chen. Tell them we need to search the bank area again. Tonight. He hung up and focused on Ruth again. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stay here while my people look for the missing money. If we find it, great. If we don't, then you're going to help us figure out who took it. Ruth's voice was shaking with rage now, cutting through the fear. Why would I help you? You destroyed my life. You used me, threw me away, and now you're acting like I owe you something. Marcus leaned down until his face was inches from hers. Because if you don't help me, I'll make sure you never see daylight again. Because that baby you're carrying, nobody knows about it except my family, and they don't care. You could disappear tomorrow and not a single person would look for you. No friends, no family, no job. You're a ghost, Ruth. The cruelty in his eyes was something she'd never seen before, and Ruth realized with horrible clarity that she'd never really known her husband at all. The man she'd fallen in love with had never existed. He'd been a character Marcus played, a role he performed until he didn't need to anymore. There's something you don't know, Ruth said, her voice steadier now. Something that's going to make you regret every single thing you've done to me. Marcus raised an eyebrow, amused. Really? What's that? Ruth looked him straight in the eye. Your mother came to see me yesterday. It was a lie. But she needed to buy time, needed to make him uncertain. She knows about the baby. She knows everything. And she's not as heartless as you think. She's been looking for you, Marcus. She hired investigators. And when they find out you're alive, when they find out you faked your disappearance and left your pregnant wife on the streets, the Wellington family reputation is going to be destroyed. Every news station in Atlanta will run the story. The family that built their fortune on respectability and charity will be exposed as frauds. Marcus's face went pale. You're lying. But Ruth could see the doubt creeping in. I? Your mother loved that family name more than she loves you. And when she finds out what you've done, she'll cut you off. No inheritance, no trust fund, no Wellington money. You will have nothing. The tall man looked nervous now. Boss, if she's telling the truth, we need to move. If investigators are looking, this whole operation is compromised. Marcus grabbed Ruth by the hair and yanked her head back. If you contacted my mother, if you told her anything, I will kill you myself. But before Ruth could respond, the warehouse door exploded open, and voices shouted commands she couldn't understand. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Police. FBI. Someone had found them. Marcus let go of Ruth and ran toward the back exit, his men following. Ruth fell off the chair onto the concrete, curling around her belly as footsteps thundered around her. And then someone was lifting her up, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders, asking if she was okay. But Ruth couldn't answer because she just realized something that changed everything. The police weren't here for Marcus. They were here for her. Someone had called in a tip about the missing $5 million, and Ruth was about to become the #1 suspect. Think Ruth's nightmare's over. Think again, because Chapter 5 is where everything explodes. The Wellingtons face consequences, and Ruth makes a decision that will shock you. Hit that like button. Leave a comment about whether Ruth should keep fighting or give up, and don't forget to subscribe because you won't believe what happens next. The FBI interrogation room was freezing cold, and Ruth had been sitting there for 6 hours with nothing but a cup of water and a blanket that smelled like disinfectant. Her head wound had been cleaned and bandaged at the hospital, her ribs x-rayed to make sure nothing was broken, and a doctor confirmed the baby was okay despite everything she'd been through. But now she was here, being treated like a criminal, while Marcus and his men had somehow escaped during the raid. The agent across from her was a black woman in her 40s named Detective Sarah Mitchell, and her eyes were sharp and unforgiving. "Let's go through this one more time, Mrs. Wellington. You found a bag containing approximately $2 million behind First National Bank 4 days ago. You took that bag to a motel, where you were subsequently kidnapped by 2 men working for your husband, Marcus Wellington, who everyone believed was missing. Do I have that right?" Ruth nodded, exhausted beyond words. "Yes, I already told you everything." Detective Mitchell leaned forward. "What you haven't told me is where the other $3 million went, because our investigation shows that $5 million was placed behind that bank as part of a money laundering operation. Only $2 million was recovered. You're the only person who had access to that bag before Marcus Wellington's people found you. So where's the missing money, Ruth?" If you're loving this story, make sure you subscribe right now because things are about to get intense. Ruth wanted to scream. She wanted to break down and cry and beg someone to believe her. But she was so tired of begging, so tired of being treated like she was worthless. "I don't have the money. I never had all of it. The bag was in a gutter, half submerged in water. Maybe some of it washed into the soil. Maybe someone else found it before I did. I don't know." Detective Mitchell pulled out a folder and opened it, spreading photos across the table. Ruth's stomach turned as she recognized pictures of herself at the motel, walking down the street with a duffel bag, entering the laundromat. They'd been watching her, following her, building a case against her. These photos show you, alone, with that bag for 3 full days. Nobody else touched it. Nobody else had access. The motel manager confirmed you paid cash. You've been spending that money. Ruth shook her head. "I paid for 1 room. $80. That's all I spent." The detective's expression didn't change. "The problem, Ruth, is that you're the perfect suspect. Homeless, desperate, pregnant, abandoned by your wealthy husband's family. You have every motive to steal money and disappear. And now you're telling me that your missing husband is actually alive and running a money laundering operation? That's convenient. That's the kind of story someone tells when they are caught and trying to shift blame." Ruth felt something inside her break, but instead of collapsing, she felt a strange kind of clarity settle over her. She'd been pushed around, thrown away, beaten, kidnapped, and now accused of crimes she didn't commit. Everyone wanted to make her the villain in a story where she was just trying to survive, but she was done being a victim. "You don't believe me about Marcus," Ruth said, her voice steady. "Fine. Then let me tell you something that you can verify. Marcus Wellington is alive and operating out of warehouses near the railroad tracks on the south side. He's involved in money laundering, probably for real estate deals or offshore accounts. His partners are 2 men, one tall with a scar, one shorter. They drive a black SUV with tinted windows. And if you check his family's financial records, I guarantee you'll find connections to shell companies and suspicious transactions." Detective Mitchell studied her for a long moment. "And how do you know all this?" Ruth met her eyes. "Because I just spent the last 3 hours in that warehouse with them. Because my husband told me everything before your raid interrupted us. because he admitted that he faked his disappearance to get rid of me, that his family threw me out on purpose, that I was never anything more than a pawn in whatever game is playing. She paused, letting that sink in. You want to arrest someone? Arrest Marcus. Arrest his family for conspiracy, because I'm just a pregnant woman who picked up the wrong bag at the wrong time. The detective's phone rang, and she stepped out of the room to answer it. Ruth sat there, her hands resting on her belly, feeling the baby kick. She'd been fighting for survival for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to fight back. But something had shifted. Marcus thought he could destroy her. The Wellingtons thought they could throw her away. The FBI thought they could intimidate her. But Ruth had grown up in neighborhoods where you learned to be tough or you didn't survive. She'd worked her way through nursing school while working 2 jobs. She'd dealt with trauma patients, gunshot wounds, overdoses, and death on 12-hour shifts. She wasn't some delicate flower who would just break because life got hard. She was stronger than any of them realized. When Detective Mitchell came back, her expression had changed. We just picked up Marcus Wellington trying to board a private plane to the Cayman Islands. We also found evidence of the money laundering operation you described. Shell companies, offshore accounts, fake real estate transactions. He has been running this for at least 2 years. Ruth felt something like vindication wash over her. So you believe me now? The detective sat down heavily. We're still investigating the missing 3 million. But yes, your story checks out. Marcus Wellington is in custody, and we're bringing in his family for questioning. She paused. I have to ask, though, if you knew he was laundering money, why did you marry him? Ruth almost laughed, but it came out as something bitter. I didn't know. I was a nurse who met a charming man in the emergency room. He was rich, handsome, and he made me feel like I was worth something. I didn't know he was a criminal. I didn't know I was just a cover story, a way to look legitimate while he built his operation. She looked down at her hands. I didn't know a lot of things, but I know now. Detective Mitchell nodded slowly. We're going to need you to testify against him. Everything he told you in that warehouse, everything his family did to you, all of it. With your testimony, we can put Marcus away for a long time. Ruth thought about that. Thought about standing in a courtroom and facing the Wellingtons. Thought about telling the world what they'd done to her. Thought about her baby growing up knowing that their father was a criminal and their grandmother had thrown their mother out like trash. It wasn't the future she'd imagined when she married Marcus, but it was a future she had. I'll testify, Ruth said, but I want something in return. The detective raised an eyebrow. What's that? Ruth leaned forward, and for the first time in days, she felt like she had power instead of just survival. I want full immunity. I want protection for me and my baby. And I want help getting back on my feet. A place to live, medical care, enough money to start over. Because I'm not going to destroy the Wellingtons just so I can end up back on the streets. Detective Mitchell considered this, then nodded. I can make that happen. Witness protection, relocation assistance, medical coverage. The FBI takes care of people who cooperate with major investigations. She extended her hand across the table. Do we have a deal? Ruth shook her hand, and she felt something shift in her chest. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about justice. This was about making sure that Marcus and his family faced consequences for what they'd done. This was about taking back the power they'd stolen from her. We have a deal, Ruth said. 2 days later, Ruth was sitting in a safe house in a suburb she didn't recognize, eating real food and sleeping in a real bed for the first time in over a week. The FBI had moved fast. They'd arrested Victoria, Richard, and Jasmine Wellington on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to money laundering. The news was all over Atlanta. The wealthy Wellington family, pillars of the black community, exposed as criminals. Their charitable foundation was being investigated. Their real estate empire was crumbling. And at the center of it all was Ruth, the abandoned pregnant wife who'd picked up a bag of $5 million and accidentally unraveled everything. But the missing 3 million was still out there somewhere, and Ruth had a feeling that particular mystery was about to reveal one final, devastating truth. Are you ready for the final chapter where all secrets are exposed and Ruth gets the justice she deserves? Drop a comment with your predictions. Smash that subscribe button and get ready for Chapter 6 because this ending will leave you speechless. Ruth stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of the safe house, watching the sun rise over a neighborhood she still didn't know the name of, her hand resting on her belly where the baby was doing morning gymnastics. It had been 2 weeks since the FBI arrested the Wellington family, 2 weeks since she'd agreed to testify, 2 weeks since her life had stopped being about pure survival and started being about something else entirely. Justice, maybe, or revenge. She wasn't sure there was much difference in them all. Detective Mitchell had called last night with news that made Ruth's blood run cold. They'd found the missing $3 million, and the person who'd taken it was someone Ruth never would have suspected in a million years. The detective was coming this morning to explain everything, and Ruth had barely slept trying to figure out who could have known about the money drop, who could have gotten to that bag before she did, who could have stolen half the cash and left the rest for her to find like some kind of twisted gift. Her mind kept circling back to impossible answers. Marcus had a partner she didn't know about. One of the FBI agents was Doty. Someone from the Wellington family had double-crossed Marcus. But when Detective Mitchell walked through the door at 8 in the morning with a laptop and a grim expression, the truth she revealed was so much worse than anything Ruth had imagined. If you want to see how this all ends, you better be subscribed because what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about this story. Detective Mitchell set her laptop on the kitchen table and gestured for Ruth to sit down. The older woman looked tired, like she'd been up all night piecing together a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. "We found the $3 million, she said without preamble, pulling up a series of bank records and surveillance footage on her screen. "It was deposited into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands 3 days before you found the bag behind First National Bank. The account belongs to a shell company called Meridian Holdings, which is owned by another shell company, which eventually traces back to a single individual." She turned the laptop so Ruth could see the screen, and Ruth's heart stopped when she saw the name highlighted in yellow, Jean Patricia Morrison. Her grandmother. Ruth felt the room spin, felt her breakfast threatening to come back up, felt every certainty she'd built her life on crumble into dust. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "My grandmother died 3 years ago. She can't have opened an account or deposited anything. Someone stole her identity." But Detective Mitchell was shaking her head, pulling up more documents, death certificates, banking records, passport stamps. "Your grandmother didn't die 3 years ago, Ruth. She faked her death. She's been living in the Cayman Islands under an assumed name, and she's the one who took the $3 million from Marcus Wellington's money drop." The detective paused, letting that impossible information sink in. "She's also the one who called in the anonymous tip that led us to that warehouse. She's the reason we raided it when we did, the reason we caught Marcus, the reason you're still alive. Your grandmother has been watching you this whole time, and she's been playing a game that none of us understood until now." Ruth couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't process what she was hearing. Her grandmother, the woman who'd raised her after her mother overdosed, the woman who'd taught her to be strong and independent, the woman whose medical bills had forced Ruth to work 2 jobs through nursing school, was alive, had been alive this whole time, had let Ruth believe she was dead while secretly living in the Caribbean with stolen money. "Why?" Ruth finally managed to say, the word coming out as half question, half accusation. "Why would she do this? Why would she let me think she was dead? Why would she steal from Marcus?" Detective Mitchell pulled up more files, and Ruth saw documents that made her head spin, medical records showing her grandmother had been diagnosed with terminal cancer 5 years ago, financial records showing she'd been drowning in debt, insurance policies that had paid out after her supposed death, and then, most damning of all, evidence that Jean Morrison had been working as a consultant for various criminal organizations for the past 3 years, laundering money, setting up offshore accounts, facilitating illegal transactions. "Your grandmother wasn't just some sweet old lady," the detective said gently. "She was a forensic accountant before she retired, one of the best in the Southeast. And when she got sick, when the bills started piling up and the insurance wouldn't cover her treatment, she made a choice. She faked her death, took the insurance payout, and started working for people like Marcus Wellington. She used her skills to help them hide money, move assets, stay ahead of the law. The detective closed the laptop and looked Ruth in the eye. The night Marcus's money was supposed to be picked up, your grandmother was the one who was supposed to collect it. She was his accountant, his money launderer, the person he trusted to handle the cash. But she double-crossed him. She took $3 million, left $2 million in the bag, and made sure you would find it. Ruth felt tears streaming down her face, hot and angry and confused. She set me up. She knew I'd been thrown out. She knew I was homeless and pregnant and desperate. She left that money for me to find, knowing it would put me in danger. But even as she said it, Ruth realized it wasn't quite right, because if her grandmother had wanted her dead, she would have just taken all the money and disappeared. Instead, she'd left half of it, enough to get Ruth caught, enough to bring down Marcus and his family, enough to expose the entire operation. Her grandmother had used Ruth as bait, but she'd also called in the FBI to make sure Ruth survived. It was cruel and calculating, and somehow, in a twisted way, it was protection. Why didn't she just come to me? Ruth said, her voice breaking. Why all of this? If she was alive, if she knew I needed help, why not just help me? Detective Mitchell pulled out a phone and played a video file, and Ruth's breath caught when she saw her grandmother's face on the screen. Jean Morrison looked older than Ruth remembered, her hair completely white now, her face thinner, but her eyes were still sharp and knowing. The video had been recorded recently, probably in the last few days, and when her grandmother spoke, Ruth heard the voice she'd missed every single day for 3 years. "Hello, baby girl," Jean said, and Ruth started sobbing. If you're watching this, it means the FBI found the money and put the pieces together. It means you're safe. Marcus is in custody, and his family is facing justice. I know you have questions, and I know you're angry with me. You have every right to be. I faked my death because I was dying, and I didn't want you to watch me suffer. But then I found treatment in the Cayman Islands, experimental medicine that wasn't approved in the States, and it worked. I went into remission, but by then, I'd already taken the insurance money. I'd already started working for people who would kill me if I tried to leave. So I stayed dead, and I watched you from a distance, and I hated myself every single day for not being there when you needed me. The video continued, and Ruth watched through tears as her grandmother explained everything, how she'd been Marcus Wellington's accountant for 2 years, how she discovered he was planning to use Ruth and throw her away, how she tried to warn Ruth but couldn't without exposing herself and putting Ruth in even more danger. When Marcus's family threw you out, I knew I had to do something, Jean said on the video. So I came up with a plan. I'd steal half his money, leave the other half where I knew you'd find it, and then make sure the FBI caught him before he could hurt you. I knew it would be dangerous. I knew you'd be scared. But I also knew that girl I raised, my strong, smart, resilient granddaughter, would survive. And you did, baby. You survived, and now you're going to have a baby of your own, and I'm so proud of you. Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears on the screen. I can't come back to Atlanta. I can't face the charges that would come with faking my death and laundering money for criminals. But I've set up a trust fund for you and your baby. $3 million that's completely clean, completely legal, transferred through channels that can't be traced back to Marcus or his operation. That money is yours, Ruth. Use it to build the life you deserve. Use it to give my great-grandchild everything we never had. And know that even though I can't be there with you, I'm watching over you, always. The video ended, and Ruth sat there in stunned silence, feeling like she'd been torn apart and put back together in a completely different shape. Her grandmother was alive. Her grandmother had saved her. Her grandmother had given her $3 million and a chance to start over. But her grandmother was also a criminal who'd faked her death and broken Ruth's heart. How was she supposed to feel about that? How was she supposed to reconcile the woman who'd raised her with the woman who'd manipulated her like a chess piece? Detective Mitchell gave her a moment, then spoke softly. We can't prosecute your grandmother without extraditing her from the Cayman Islands, and honestly, Given that she helped us take down a major money laundering operation, the FBI isn't interested in pursuing her. The trust fund she set up for you is legitimate, paid for with money she earned consulting for various companies over the years, nothing tied to criminal activity. You can accept it without any legal consequences." She paused. "Your grandmother is offering you a gift, Ruth. The question is whether you can accept it knowing where she's been and what she's done." Ruth stood up and walked back to the window, watching cars drive past in streets that led to lives she'd never know, feeling the baby kick inside her like a reminder that none of this was just about her anymore. She had a choice to make: reject her grandmother's blood money and struggle to rebuild her life from nothing, or accept it and use it to give her child the security and opportunities she'd never had. She thought about the last 2 weeks, sleeping on concrete, digging through trash, being beaten and kidnapped and accused of crimes she didn't commit. She thought about Marcus and his family, who'd used her and thrown her away without a second thought. She thought about the system that was so quick to assume she was guilty just because she was desperate. And she thought about her grandmother, who'd done terrible things but had also made sure Ruth survived, who'd sacrificed her own freedom to give Ruth a future. The answer, when it came, was surprisingly easy. Ruth turned back to Detective Mitchell and nodded. "I'll take the money, not because I forgive her for what she did, but because my baby deserves better than what I had. Because I'm tired of being punished for other people's crimes. Because survival isn't enough anymore. I want to actually live." The detective smiled, the first real smile Ruth had seen from her. "Good. I was hoping you'd say that." She pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. "These are the trust fund documents. The money will be available to you as soon as you sign. There's also information about a house that's been purchased for you in a nice neighborhood, prenatal care at one of the best hospitals in the state, and a scholarship fund for your child's education. Your grandmother thought of everything." Ruth picked up the pen, and for the first time since Marcus had walked out of her life, she felt something like hope bloom in her chest. She signed the documents with a hand that didn't shake, and when she was done, she was no longer a homeless pregnant woman with nothing. She was a mother-to-be with $3 million, a fresh start, and a grandmother she'd probably never see again but who loved her enough to burn down an empire to keep her safe. 3 months later, Ruth sat in a sunny nursery in a house she owned, rocking her newborn daughter and watching the news report about Marcus Wellington's sentencing. 20 years in federal prison for money laundering, conspiracy, and fraud. His mother Victoria got 15 years. His father Richard got 10. His sister Jasmine got 5 years probation for her minor role. The Wellington Empire had collapsed completely, their assets seized, their reputation destroyed, their name forever associated with corruption and greed. Ruth felt nothing watching their downfall, no satisfaction, no vindication, just a quiet sense that justice had been served and she could finally move on. Her daughter, who she'd named Jean after the grandmother who'd saved her life in the most complicated way possible, made a small sound in her sleep, and Ruth looked down at the tiny perfect face, feeling love so fierce it took her breath away. This baby would never know poverty or desperation, would never be thrown away by people who were supposed to love her, would never have to choose between pride and survival. Ruth had made sure of that. The doorbell rang, and Ruth carefully placed baby Jean in her crib before heading downstairs, her body still recovering from childbirth but stronger than it had been in months. When she opened the door, she found a package with no return address sitting on her porch. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small velvet box. Ruth's hand shook as she recognized her grandmother's handwriting. The letter was short, just a few lines. "I'm so proud of the woman you've become and the mother you're going to be. I wish I could hold my great-granddaughter, but some prices are worth paying for the people we love. This was my mother's, and now it's yours. Tell Jean about me someday, the good and the bad, so she knows that love isn't always simple, but it's always worth fighting for. Love always, Grandma." Ruth opened the velvet box and found a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a bird in flight, the same necklace her grandmother had worn every day of Ruth's childhood. She put it on with trembling fingers, and as the pendant settled against her heart, Ruth felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time: peace. She stood on her porch in the afternoon sun, one hand on the necklace and the other resting on her healed ribs, thinking about the journey that had brought her here, from a mansion to the streets, from desperation to hope, from victim to survivor to something more, a mother, a woman who'd faced the worst the world could throw at her and come out the other side standing. Marcus had tried to destroy her. His family had tried to erase her. The system had tried to break her. But Ruth had survived them all, not because she was perfect or because she'd made all the right choices, but because she refused to give up even when giving up would have been easier. She'd picked up a bag that didn't belong to her, and it had led her through hell, but it had also led her home, to this house, to this life, to this child sleeping upstairs who would never know what it felt like to be unwanted. Ruth went back inside, locked the door behind her, and climbed the stairs to the nursery where baby Jean was waking up, her tiny fists waving in the air. Ruth picked her up, kissed her forehead, and whispered promises that she intended to keep, promises of safety and love and a future full of possibilities. And somewhere in the Cayman Islands, an old woman with white hair and sharp eyes watched the sunset over the ocean, thinking about the granddaughter she'd sacrificed everything to save and the great-granddaughter she'd never hold but would always protect from a distance. Jean Morrison had lived a complicated life, made impossible choices, crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. But she'd done it all for family, and in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Back in Atlanta, Ruth settled into the rocking chair with her daughter and began to sing a lullaby her grandmother had taught her years ago, her voice soft and sure, carrying notes of love and loss and hope for tomorrow. The Wellington family was gone, destroyed by their own greed and cruelty. The $5 million had been found, accounted for, justice served. But the real treasure had never been the money. It had been the strength Ruth discovered in herself, the love her grandmother had shown in the most unexpected way, and the new life she was building from the ashes of her old one. Ruth had been abandoned, betrayed, and broken, but she hadn't stayed down. She'd gotten back up, fought back, and won. And now, with her daughter in her arms and her grandmother's necklace around her neck, Ruth finally understood what survival really meant. It wasn't just about making it through the darkness. It was about finding your way back to the light and helping others do the same. That's where our story ends, with Ruth rocking a baby in a house bought with blood money that became a blessing, wearing a necklace that symbolized complicated love, living a life that proved even when everything falls apart, you can still build something beautiful from the pieces. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button, drop a comment about what you learned from Ruth's journey, and remember that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us exactly where we're meant to be. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.